My stepson kissed me, but he was already sleeping with my best friend. I went to the cabin hoping to feel human again. What I found instead was a betrayal layered in silence, secrets, and a kiss I'll never forget. I thought I was the danger, but I was just a target. I used to think that if I kept the house spotless, made his coffee just the way he liked it, stayed predictable and agreeable, maybe, just maybe, he'd look at me the way he used to. But Daniel stopped seeing me long before the marriage officially ended. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't violent. It was quieter than that. Like the slow fading of a once favorite photograph left too long in the sun. For years, I lived next to a man who occupied space, not emotion. He was never cruel, never unfaithful, at least not in the ways people easily define. But he was distant, detached, always preoccupied with something just out of reach. I became background noise, functional, reliable, invisible. We separated amicably, that's what the papers say. But no piece of paper can describe the ache of being unloved but not unloved enough to justify leaving sooner. I stayed too long in a house that was no longer home, convincing myself that loneliness was still better than failure. And then there was Tyler. Daniel's son from his previous marriage. I came into Tyler's life when he was 10, and though I was never Mom, we shared something soft, a quiet bond built on trust, not obligation. When Daniel and I split, Tyler kept in touch, occasionally a text, sometimes a call, always polite, always warm. I thought nothing of it at first. But things had changed. I was 38 now, not old, not young, somewhere in that overlooked middle space where no one asks if you're okay anymore. I didn't go out much. I buried myself in HR case files, benefits audits, and policy reviews. I wore my professionalism like armor. It kept people out. It kept pain in. Olivia, my best friend since college, had seen the signs. You need to breathe, she said one day, just a weekend away. Cabin, wine, firelight, no emails. She even offered to plan it herself. Said Tyler could drive us up. He owed her a favor from some freelance thing she'd helped him get last fall. It sounded innocent. It was innocent, until it wasn't. But I didn't know that then. Back then, I thought I was just a tired woman saying yes to rest. I had no idea I was stepping into a space where silence would scream, where familiar faces would fracture, and where I'd learn the cruelest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from those you believed would never look at you and lie. The cabin sat quietly among the trees, surrounded by pine and stillness. Olivia had picked it, said nature had a way of resetting the soul. I wanted to believe her. I unpacked slowly, folded sweaters into unfamiliar drawers, pretending I felt something, peace, maybe, relief, but mostly I felt hollow. Like the version of me who used to laugh too loud and dream too big had packed up and left long before I ever arrived. I didn't talk about the nights I couldn't sleep, about the way I'd wake up and just stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was it, if this was the rest of my life. No husband, no children of my own, just a resume, a mortgage, and polite conversations that never touched the marrow. Olivia filled the cabin with warmth, candles, playlists, wine. She tried. She always tried. But even as we toasted with our glasses and shared stories from college, I felt the distance between us. Not resentment, not rivalry, just drift. The kind that grows slowly between people who love each other but don't ask real questions anymore. Tyler arrived later that night. He looked older than I remembered. Broader shoulders, softer eyes. He smiled when he saw me. Not out of obligation, but recognition. Like he saw something in me that even I'd forgotten. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't looking for attention. But when you've spent long enough being invisible, even the gentlest glance can feel like sunlight on frozen skin. It wasn't desire that woke me that night. It was the silence, the kind that echoes inside your chest when you realize you've built a life where no one asks how your heart is doing anymore. Tyler didn't knock when he arrived the next morning. He walked in like he'd always belonged there, lugging a duffel bag and a paper bag full of snacks. Olivia hugged him first, all big energy and laughter. I stood behind her, unsure of what to say or how to say it. "Hey, Marissa," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "You look well." I didn't, but I thanked him anyway. He moved around the cabin like someone who knew his way around silence. He didn't fill space with noise. He asked questions, but didn't push. He noticed things, that I folded my napkin twice before setting it down, that I avoided eye contact when the conversation veered too close to personal, that I drank tea instead of wine. We took a walk that afternoon. Olivia had gone into town for supplies. It wasn't planned. He asked if I wanted fresh air, and I said yes before I could think of a reason not to. The forest trail was narrow, quiet, shaded by tall trees. We talked about nothing at first: music, books, how strange it felt to be unplugged. Then came the pause. He looked at me, more curious than cautious. "Do you ever feel like you're still holding your breath, even after everything's supposed to be over?" The question struck deeper than I expected. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded. He seemed to understand. We sat on a flat rock overlooking a stream. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I realized I hadn't been this close to someone in a long time, physically or emotionally. And Tyler wasn't doing anything inappropriate. He was just present, steady, attuned, like he saw the fracture lines I'd worked so hard to hide. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel invisible. It was dangerous, that kind of safety. That evening, he offered to cook dinner. Olivia teased him about his chef phase, but I watched him move through the kitchen with quiet competence. His hands knew what they were doing. His voice had settled into something calm, something grounding. When he glanced up and caught me watching, he didn't look away. He smiled. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't inappropriate. But it was aware. And so was I. The next day blurred into soft routines: coffee, scattered conversations, the quiet hum of wind through the trees. Nothing dramatic happened, no long stares, no confessions, but something unspoken lingered in the air, like the scent of smoke long after the fire's out. Tyler helped me gather firewood in the late afternoon. We didn't talk much, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional, like we both knew words would only make the tension harder to ignore. At one point, he reached out to steady me as I slipped on a damp patch of ground. His hand on my arm lingered just half a second too long, but long enough to notice. Inside, Olivia played music in the kitchen. She was humming, pouring wine, laughing to herself as she cooked. She didn't notice how close we stood when we came back in. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that the way Tyler looked at me was innocent, that I was projecting my own loneliness into every glance. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the way his gaze settled when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way his voice softened when he spoke to me alone. The way I felt when he entered a room, like I had to brace myself for the rush of warmth I wasn't supposed to feel. That night, Olivia went to bed early. Said she was tired. Too much wine. Tyler and I stayed behind, watching the last embers in the fireplace. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. "It's peaceful here." "Yeah," he said, eyes on the fire, almost too peaceful. I glanced at him, and he looked back. Neither of us moved, neither of us smiled. The moment stretched just long enough to feel like a question we were both afraid to ask. I stood up first, told him good night, and walked to my room. My heart was loud in my chest, not because anything had happened, but because I knew something already had. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. It was sometime after midnight when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, like a secret trying not to wake the world. I had been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts tangled in everything unsaid. When I opened the door, I found Tyler standing there barefoot, a phone charger in one hand and something unreadable in his eyes. "Sorry," he whispered, "didn't mean to wake you. My phone's dying." I nodded and stepped aside. Too quickly. There's an outlet by the fireplace. He walked in quietly, the floor creaking under his weight. I followed, pulling my robe tighter even though the room was already warm. The fire had burned down to its softest glow, just enough to cast shadows on the wooden beams above. He plugged in his phone, then sat on the edge of the couch. I didn't sit beside him. I stood across the room, pretending to fuss with a blanket, pretending this wasn't already spiraling. You couldn't sleep either? He asked, voice low. I shook my head. Too quiet. My mind doesn't know what to do when everything stops. He nodded, like he understood more than he should. It's weird, right? How silence can be louder than any argument. That line hit something in me, too true, too close. I looked up and met his gaze. He wasn't a boy in that moment. He wasn't a stepson. He was a man sitting in the dark with a woman he saw. And I let him see me. Not the polished version, not the role, just me. He stood slowly, the room stretching thinner with each step he took toward me. I should have moved, I should have stopped him, but I didn't. When he reached me, he didn't touch me at first. He just looked, eyes full of a question I didn't dare answer. His fingers grazed the edge of my sleeve. Barely there, barely real. I shouldn't be here, he said, his voice nearly a breath. I know, I whispered. He stepped back then, but just slightly, like giving me a final chance to say no. I didn't. And that's when it happened. A kiss, gentle, searching, not hungry, not wild, but real. It was the kind of kiss that starts in the soul before it ever touches skin. The kind born not from lust, but from ache, from being unseen for too long, from longing to feel human again. His lips barely pressed against mine, then pulled away, like he was checking if I'd flinch, if I'd push him back, if I'd pretend I hadn't felt it too. But I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just stood there, trembling in a body that hadn't remembered heat in years. And he knew. That scared me more than the kiss itself. He stepped back fully, his breath uneven. I'm sorry, he said, eyes wide, voice breaking. That was, God, I shouldn't have done that. I still couldn't speak, couldn't move. Shame flooded in, but it was tangled with something worse, relief. Relief that someone had looked at me and wanted. Not what I gave, not what I did, but me. I should go, he said, backing toward the hallway. And I just nodded. He left quietly, the door clicking shut behind him like the closing of a vault. My knees gave way, and I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Not from regret, not yet. But from the unbearable truth. Nothing had really happened. But everything had. And I knew there would be no going back. Morning arrived too brightly, the kind of light that exposes everything, even what you wish had stayed hidden. I moved through the cabin like a ghost, setting the kettle on the stove, folding the same blanket twice just to keep my hands busy. My chest was tight, throat dry, skin electric with shame. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again, his breath near mine, the tremble in his fingers, the way I didn't stop him. Tyler emerged first. His hair was damp, fresh from a shower, but his face held the same weight mine did. He didn't look at me. Not really, just a polite nod, a soft, morning, as if we were strangers again. It hurt more than I expected. Olivia joined us a few minutes later, chipper, radiant in a way that now felt artificial. She poured herself coffee, sat at the table, and started scrolling through her phone like nothing was broken. But I felt it, the fracture. It stretched across the table like an invisible crack. When Tyler spoke, he kept it surface level. Weather, groceries, the hike trail we might try. His voice didn't shake, but his eyes rarely met mine. Every time they did, it was like flinching. I couldn't eat. I picked at toast, smiled when necessary, and prayed no one noticed the way my hand trembled on the mug. But I knew Olivia noticed. She was always more observant than she let on. Her gaze lingered a little too long. And when Tyler stood to refill his water, I caught something flicker in her expression, suspicion. Maybe, or worse, knowing. After breakfast, I found Tyler's charger still plugged in by the fire. I picked it up, cradling it like something fragile. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. It meant he had been here. It meant I hadn't imagined it. The rest of the day was filled with quiet avoidance. We went into town, browsed shops we didn't care about. I stood between them, my best friend and the boy who had almost kissed me into remembering who I used to be, and felt like a traitor to both. That night, I sat outside alone, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. I told myself again and again, nothing happened. But that wasn't true. Something had. And now, it was inside me, blooming like guilt but tasting like heat. I didn't sleep that night either. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't rest. I lay there in the dark, eyes wide open, hearing every creak of the old cabin. I kept thinking, what kind of woman lets something like that happen? Worse, what kind of woman wants it to? By morning, the guilt had settled deep in my bones. But it had company now, confusion, suspicion, and something colder than either. Tyler had left early, claiming he had to take a call outside. Olivia was in the kitchen again, humming like always, as if nothing had shifted. But it had, and I started seeing things I hadn't let myself see before. The way she smiled too warmly at him. The way he responded, not like a son, not like a friend, like something else, familiar, practiced. That's when I started questioning everything. Not just the kiss, not just my silence, but what had been going on long before I ever stepped into that cabin. Later that day, Olivia stepped out for a walk and left her tablet on the coffee table. I shouldn't have touched it. I told myself it was just curiosity. But deep down, I already knew what I was looking for. And I found it. Messages, dozens of them, between her and Tyler, buried in calendar invites and project notes. But there if you knew where to look. It went back weeks, jokes, emojis, late-night chats that no mother should ever have to read. They'd been close, too close, before the kiss, before the cabin, before I even knew what was happening. I dropped the tablet, my hands shaking, my stomach turned. It hadn't started with me. I wasn't the beginning of anything. I was just collateral. The next morning, I confronted Daniel, not because I thought he'd fix it, but because I had to know if he knew. And he did. He didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, cold and unreadable. She wanted revenge, he said, and you made it easy. I couldn't breathe. You knew? He nodded. You chose Olivia over me years ago. Maybe this was inevitable. That moment broke something in me I didn't even know was still intact. I had been betrayed not once, but layer by layer, by my husband, by my best friend, and by the boy I thought just saw me. But maybe he only saw a door left open, and walked through it like they all did. I stared at myself in the mirror that night, searching for the villain in the reflection. I didn't see one. I saw a woman starving for connection. A woman set on fire, then blamed for burning. I used to think betrayal looked like shouting, like slammed doors, like storming out, but it doesn't. Betrayal can look like your best friend laughing in your kitchen, like your husband flipping a page in the newspaper without looking up, like your stepson brushing your shoulder just a little too softly. It creeps in, smiles first, speaks gently, and by the time you realize it's been feeding on your silence, there's nothing left but a shell of the person you used to be. For weeks, I said nothing, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure anyone would care to hear it. They had already written their stories, assigned their roles. I was the weak one, the fool, the woman who didn't see it coming, or worse, the one who let it happen. But I've learned something since then. The most dangerous thing you can do to a woman isn't to betray her. It's to make her feel invisible. Because once she sees herself again, truly sees herself, there's no putting her back in the dark. I won't forget what happened in that cabin. I won't forget the kiss, the messages, the silence that screamed louder than words. But I also won't carry their shame anymore. That belongs to them. I've started writing, not for revenge, not for pity, for clarity, for the woman who stared back at me in the mirror and asked, when did I stop mattering? This story isn't about what Tyler did, or what Olivia did, or what Daniel let happen. It's about what I let myself feel. What I almost believed I didn't deserve. And what I finally realized I could survive. If you're listening to this and you feel invisible, forgotten, replaceable, I see you. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're just in the silence before your story begins again. The cabin is empty now. Olivia never returned after I confronted her. She didn't beg, didn't explain, didn't deny. She just looked at me with the calm cruelty of someone who had already won. Tyler stopped calling. I guess whatever game they were playing ended the moment it stopped being fun. Or maybe it was never a game to him. Maybe that's what terrifies me the most. I still don't know. Daniel filed for divorce 2 weeks later. No drama, just documents in an envelope. Signed with the same detachment he wore through most of our marriage. I didn't fight it. I didn't want to. The truth was, we had both left long ago, we just hadn't had the courage to close the door until now. I stayed in the cabin longer than I planned. Alone. No distractions. No noise. Just the hum of the refrigerator at night and the occasional creak of old wood shifting in the dark. I thought the silence would comfort me. But it didn't. It haunted me. Every corner held a memory. Every chair, a conversation that meant too much or nothing at all. The couch still smelled faintly of cedar and Tyler's cologne. I washed the cushions 3 times. The scent stayed anyway. I sat at the kitchen table last night with a glass of wine and stared at my reflection in the dark window. Just a faint outline of a woman, older, quieter, but not broken. I wrote again, a letter I'll never send. Maybe to Tyler, maybe to myself, maybe to the woman I used to be. I still don't know if I'll ever tell the full story. Maybe this is enough. Maybe saying it once, to a page, to a camera, to a stranger willing to listen, is all the closure I'll get. But I know this. I'm not the same woman who walked into this cabin believing that being quiet kept you safe. I know now, being silent only teaches people how to ignore you. And I won't be ignored anymore. We always think we'll know when something's wrong. That our instincts will scream. Our gut will revolt. And we'll catch it in time. But the truth is, most betrayals don't arrive with sirens. They arrive quietly, with familiar faces, gentle touches, and well-rehearsed smiles. What happened to me in that cabin wasn't just about a kiss. Or even about the betrayal that followed. It was about the slow erosion of self-worth that happens when you're overlooked for too long, when you're the woman who makes things run but is never asked how she's really doing. I spent years believing that if I held everything together, it would all be okay. That if I didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't break, I'd be enough. That someone would eventually notice me again, love me again. But what I've learned is this: invisibility is a slow death. And silence doesn't protect you, it isolates you. If you're listening to this and feeling that same quiet ache, maybe it's not a kiss you regret. Maybe it's the nights you stayed up pretending you weren't hurting. Maybe it's the mornings you smiled through gritted teeth, making coffee for a partner who stopped saying good morning years ago. Maybe it's the way you've stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror, or how you flinch every time someone asks if you're happy, and you lie without even thinking. You don't need a scandal to validate your pain. Sometimes, being emotionally abandoned is more damaging than being physically betrayed. So what do? We reclaim. We write the story ourselves, no longer as the woman who was betrayed, but as the woman who chose not to stay buried in it. We stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be whole. We stop waiting to be loved and start loving the parts of ourselves we silenced for the sake of survival. What happened to me could happen to anyone. And that's the point. Because if it could happen in a cozy cabin surrounded by pine trees, laughter, and wine, it could happen in any home, any relationship, any quiet marriage that runs on autopilot. Pay attention to the silence. It's often where the truth begins to whisper. And the moment you start listening to it, that's when your healing begins.